Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, we're of course going to be talking about Zion Williamson's debut with the New Orleans Pelicans. But really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy the NBA, then consider subscribing. I upload basically every single day. All right, so this was a video that I always knew that I was going to do. The day after Zion debuted in the NBA, I was going to make a video about how he looked, what his debut means for the Pelicans moving forward, and just my general thoughts on it. So going into the game, I had a plan of some things that I wanted to pay attention to talk about in this video. Namely, those three things were how many minutes he played and at what positions, also how he looked physically, and then just how he looked on the court in general, playing the actual basketball game. So let's start with the minute stuff. And I was obviously excited to watch Zion play, but I tempered those expectations because even though there was no announced minutes restriction prior to the game, basically everything that I saw in Vegas and things like that had lines of like 15.5 to 16.5 minutes for Zion as like an over-under. So I knew that he probably wasn't going to play more than 20 minutes. But again, I was interested in what positions he was playing in his time on the floor. And for most of his minutes before the fourth quarter, he was playing at the 4. If you want to get exact, he played about 10.5 minutes of game time at the 4, and then about 7:50 game time at the 5. Like a minute of that was in the first half because Derek Favors got in foul trouble and they put him in at the 5 for a little bit. But for the most part, he was playing at the 4 and then a little bit less at the 5. And that was really interesting to me because I kind of figured he would be out there along with other wings because they have Favors, they have Jackson Hayes, but they were actually able to slide him in a little bit at the 5, which again was something that I was excited to see. And interestingly, as we'll get to later, all but one of his field goals came at the 5 spot in that fourth quarter explosion, obviously, that he had. So in my opinion, in terms of how he looked at those respective positions, especially offensively, he looked so much more comfortable at the 5. There was more space, there were driving lanes, he could use that first step quickness. He doesn't have a ton of on-ball creation skills at the NBA level. Defenders are just a little bit better. They're going to back off, they're going to make you shoot pull-ups. And so he struggled at times, had some turnovers trying to create at the 4 spot, but at the 5, there was a little bit more space, so we didn't have to worry so much about the help. And it was just, again, he just seemed much more comfortable on the offensive end. Now, long-term defensively, I don't know if he's going to be able to keep it up at the 5 spot. I think he has the length and the athleticism to make it work, but to have him as your full-time 5 would pretty much be like trying to have Draymond Green as your full-time 5. Like it works for stretches, but for an entire season, it's very unlikely that would work. So it'd be more of a, hey, we really need offense, let's put Zion at the 5 situation, and he could kind of hold his own defensively. I think at the rim, he'd be able to protect the rim, but it'd be more so about the other concepts of defense outside of just standing in front of the rim, the rotations and things like that he might struggle with at the 5. But moving on now, let's talk about how he looked physically. And this has been a huge topic of conversation when he hasn't been playing. He's been going through his rehab. And I really wish this didn't become as much of a conversation in the beginning of the game as it did. Like it seemed unnecessary to me. Like we can all see the guy and we can see that he's not as fit as he was in college, but he's been going through this rehab. He's been having, issues with this knee, and he's been trying to come back from the injury. He looked really good physically in preseason, and I really don't think it's going to be an issue. Like when you look at his physique in college and in preseason, I don't think it's going to be an issue at all. He definitely looked like someone that needs to get in better shape, but that shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone given the circumstances that he's been going through up to his debut. So again, not something that I'm very concerned about at all. And now let's get to how he looked on the court. So I was taking notes the entire time, and it was very, very clear that he was nervous early. Every time he touched the ball, he didn't want anything to do with it. He wanted to give it up. The crowd was going crazy every time he touched it. And again, in that first half and his first 10.5 or so minutes when he was mostly at the 4, they didn't really seem to know how they wanted to use him offensively. He was involved in maybe 2 pick and rolls. He was called for a charge on one of them. And then they were trying to get him in the post a lot. And he had 1 assist out of the post that was really nice. But apart from that, it didn't look like a comfortable situation for him, which makes complete sense. I mean, he's only playing up until the fourth quarter. He's only playing 4-minute stretches. And for basically any NBA player, it's going to be really difficult to get into a rhythm and get into a flow. And that was very apparent for Zion, not only that he couldn't get in a rhythm and a flow because of the minutes, but also that it was his first NBA game. There was so much hype around it. So all of that stuff made complete sense. But as he started to get a little bit more comfortable, he showed that the athleticism was clearly there. He still had, all the scoring ability inside on the offensive glass, and then we'll get to the three stuff later, but there was an interesting play where he tried, I think this was in the fourth when the Spurs went zone, he tried to kind of back down DeRozan and then just spun around him and sealed him and caught a lob from Lonzo Ball. And so again, once he went to the 5 in the fourth quarter, we really got to see what I think Zion's going to look like for most of his career. Not necessarily at the 5, but just in general, I think we're going to see more of what we saw in the fourth rather than what we saw through the first 3 quarters. And really that stretch for him began because the Spurs just gave him wide open looks. Like they went to his zone seemingly out of nowhere, which was really interesting. And the Spurs were up for most of the game, and for them to suddenly switch to zone was kind of strange. But he got a wide open look at a 3, and all 4 of the threes that he made were pretty uncontested. The one that really wasn't was he kind of gave LaMarcus Aldridge a jab step on the wing and then hit it, but it's not like Aldridge was all over him. The other ones were catch and shoot, so it was nice to see him make those in different scenarios. And I mean, he's not going to shoot this well from 3 every night, but it's nice to see that he's not going out there and going like 0 for 3, 0 for 4 from 3, because if that is a part of his game, then that allows some of the other stuff to develop a little bit more slowly. Like if he's going to be able to stretch the floor at a league average level and cause all that havoc in the paint and be probably one of the best rim rollers in the entire league, then some of the on-ball creation stuff off the dribble can take a little bit more time to develop, and it's not a huge deal because he has the outside spacing and he has the interior scoring, and some of the in-between stuff, again, can be developed and also isn't necessarily what this Pelican team needs when they have Drew Holiday and they have Brandon Ingram and things like that. But it was such a fun stretch, man. Like just to see a guy that was so clearly nervous and there was pressure around him. Like he was laughing, he was smiling. It's not like he was, really upset with himself with a couple of the turnovers, but it clearly wasn't the debut that he wanted to have and that we wanted to watch up until the fourth quarter. And so he started at the 5 spot to begin the fourth quarter and played all the way until the 5:20 mark of the fourth, which I think probably played more of a part than anything else in how successful he was in the fourth. Obviously, he made a ton of shots, but just getting into that rhythm, getting into that flow, feeding off the crowd, feeling like an NBA player, feeling like, hey, this is my debut, this is supposed to be fun, I'm actually in a good rhythm here. That probably had more to do with it than anything. But it was so funny because, the Alvin Gentry kept sending subs to the scorers table for him, and they were talking about it on the broadcast. They're like, oh, Melly's coming in for him, or Favors, or Hayes, whoever, they're going to come in for him at the next dead ball. And then he knocked down a 3 and they'd send the sub back. And then they'd put someone else out there and then he knocked down a 3 and they send the sub back. And I think he had like 13 points in 90 seconds or something. It was incredible. And then there was the moment at the end where Zion was definitely going to come out, right? And Alvin Gentry's like, all right, this is enough. Let's call a timeout. Let's bring him out. And Lonzo was like, okay, I'll call a timeout. And then he drove to the basket and got Zion, passed it to Zion. He got to the free throw line. But in general, man, like it was an awesome debut. It's something that a lot of people have been looking forward to. And really the only thing I want to talk about here at the end is the fact that people were upset that Zion came out of the game with 5.5 minutes left. He was rolling. Typically, obviously, you would never take that player out of the game when they've scored that many points in that little time and they looked as good as he did. But I mean, just pump the brakes a little bit. Like this guy's in his first game. He had knee surgery a couple of months ago. He's such a great athlete that they definitely need to be cautious about his return. Now, could you make the argument that maybe they're being a bit too cautious with only playing him 4 minutes at a time and waiting until this late in the season to play him and that he needs to play to get in shape? Sure, you could make that argument. My point is, ideally, we're going to see plenty more of Zion, and so pushing him any further than they did in his debut didn't make a lot of sense to me. He probably ended up playing more minutes in this game than they really expected him to going in because he had that longer stretch in the fourth. And like I said, at the end of the day, if you want to argue they're being too cautious, they should play him or he needs to play to get in shape, I mean, I'll listen to that argument, but in terms of just strictly his debut, I think they handled it well, and I'm not worried or mad at all that they ended up taking him out of the game. So moving forward, the nice thing is we should get plenty more Zion. They play again on Friday against, I believe, the Celtics, and they have a game Sunday. And as long as he's healthy, I would imagine they're probably going to keep him out of like backs-to-backs for the rest of the season. But as long as he's healthy, we're going to get to see plenty more Zion. We're going to get to see him continue to grow in terms of his skill set, in terms of what positions he's playing, how many minutes he's playing, how he looks physically. And then at the start of next season, I think is when we're going to see like fully unleashed Zion, and it's going to be really interesting to see how that works for them. Now, in terms of long-term, from a roster perspective, like I said, as long as they keep Drew Holiday, Brandon Ingram, he shouldn't have to develop the on-ball creation stuff too early But my only other thing is like long term. So they got Jackson Hayes, who I think has a good amount of potential, but is obviously still learning. And the fit between those two guys is a little bit questionable, again, just based off the 20 minutes that he played last night. But just that's the only thing I have to go off of, right? So on nights that Zion's not making threes, which you can't just assume that he's going to be an average 3-point shooter based off going 4 for 4 last night. Is that going to work? I know they wanted these two crazy athletes in the front court, and it makes sense. And obviously Zion can go to the 5 when Hayes comes out. But if those are going to be your starting players in the front court, there's going to need to be some development from both of those players significantly on the offensive end for that to work ideally. Now, it certainly can work, and I believe that Zion is going to get better as an all-ball creator, better as a shooter throughout his career, even better in the paint, come up with different moves and different ways to finish. So long-term, I think it'll be fine, but it is just something to think about long-term. And I mean, I would imagine that he's going to end up playing a good amount of 5 for the rest of the season because Hayes is good long-term, but right now he's not helping them win games very much, and he really struggles, especially on-ball defensively. You could see that with LaMarcus Aldridge last night, so I wouldn't be surprised if his minutes went down with return to Zion playing some small ball 5 off the bench. But yeah, those are my thoughts on his debut. Let me know down in the comment section below what you guys thought about Zion Williamson's debut game with the New Orleans Pelicans. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.